Many of you know Gary Shockley, but the Reverend Gary Shockley is the Director of Equipping Vital Congregations in the conference office. Um, he serves also as a spiritual director, as a grief counselor. Um, some of you know his art. He has one of his art pieces behind him hanging, a large piece, which I've appreciated. Has a children's book out, has illustrated children's books, but also has a children's book out that really went off the shelf quickly this spring, big time, around children and loss. And I know Cindy and I have purchased several of those and given them to friends of ours, and really even friends of ours who have no children, because it's a great book for adults as well. My heart sings a sad song. Gary also wrote a small book called The Meandering Way, Leading by Following the Spirit, back in the late 2000s, 2006 or 7, that literally gives us a purpose and the leading of a life more like Jesus Christ. So I'm really thankful for Gary's leadership today, and more important, I'm thankful that we can all do it together. So let's take a moment to pray. Gracious God, as we gather today, we always give you thanks. Let us be mindful that we gather in the presence of God, a God who is not distant, a God who is not unconnected, but a God who is intimately involved even in this moment. This is a God that has planned us to be together today and promises to us that if we call upon God's name, we're going to be heard. That God will draw near us, and that God will be found for those of us who are looking. That God will be refreshed for those of us who need that. And so, God of our wonderful plans, we call upon your name as we begin our time, as we begin our retreat, as we look for our souls to be both emptied and filled at the same time. And so we pray that you, as our God, would be faithful to your promise, to listen to our hearts and that which we might share. And we pray it all today in the very healing and whole name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
So I'm going to hand you over to the hands and the spirit of Gary Shockley.
Thank you, Gary, for a very kind introduction and for the opportunity to come and occupy this space with you. And I like what you said about, God creating this space for us to be together today. And I really do believe that. So often I fail to take advantage of the spaces that God creates for me. And I suffer in one way or another because of that. And I'm grateful that you and I have this space here. And as Gary said, whatever you need to do to occupy that space is entirely up to you. But just receive it as the gift that I believe God intends for it to be. There is an opportunity for you to communicate back and forth with me and probably with each other. The breakout rooms will be one where you'll be paired up with somebody and it'll be random. You can also use the chat feature or the Q&A. And Cindy's going to be monitoring those for me so that, and Cindy, you have permission to just kind of wave or stop me in my tracks if there are some things that you all would like to share. It is a different way to do a retreat via Zoom. This was designed to be a one-day retreat, actually originally a weekend retreat. So collapsing that down to a 2-hour Zoom call was no small task. And I think this is the 6th time I've done this, and every time I've done it differently because I learned from the one before it. So you're in for whatever it is God designs for us. I probably will share resources with you from time to time. This is one of my favorite books, Fragments of Your Ancient Name, and Joyce Rupp is the organizer of this. And they literally are prayers focusing on an aspect of God from different religious traditions around the globe. I just want to share this one. Dweller in the heart. You inhabit the totality of my being. So quietly, I often forget you are there. You occupy the corners where even I sometimes fear to enter and reside. You abide in the midst of my weakness and accept my endless efforts to change. Oh, the mystery, the wonder, the power of your dwelling within my simple heart. Thank you for the gift of your presence, for the permanent lodging of your love. When I first designed this retreat, I forget even what I called it, but it's become in the moment, because I realized, especially in the COVID world in which we're living, how important it is to take advantage of the moment that we get for us rather than rushing into the next task. I'm going to share my screen so I can bring up my PowerPoint, which will limit my ability to see you, and hopefully you'll still be able to see me in the corner somewhere. If that's not true, let me know. Oh, there you all are. Some of you are there. March the 13th, 2020 was a pivotal change in my life. Kim and I had traveled to Colorado, to near Aspen, Colorado, on the western slopes to visit our eldest son, Aaron, and his wife, Megan, and their newborn son, my grandson, Jetson. We were looking for a hole in our schedules where we could go out there and spend a couple of weeks, and we managed to go the end of February and early part of March. When we were flying there, we had confidence that everything was going to be okay, because COVID was pretty much a New York and California kind of experience, or actually Oregon, Portland area. Very little reporting of any kind of outbreaks anywhere else in the country. So we landed in Colorado. We learned later that in the Aspen airport, at the same time we landed, there were 9 Australians that landed as well to go skiing, who all ended up in the hospital with this mysterious illness that we now know as coronavirus. But we still felt safe in Newcastle, Colorado, because there were no reports of an outbreak. But while we were there, just within the 2 weeks, it had grown enormously, to the point where everyone was concerned. And there was talk about the Aspen airport no longer allowing anyone over the age of 60 to fly into the state of Colorado. We checked to make sure it was okay for anybody over the age of 60 to fly out of the state of Colorado, and they were glad to have that happen. But on the next to the last day that we were there, I became ill and ended up developing all the symptoms of the coronavirus. Of course, testing was not available. I had a very high fever when I went to bed that night, swallowed Tylenol all night long, didn't sleep at all, woke up. I still had a fever of about 99.8. And I thought, okay, we rented a car in case we couldn't fly home, but we thought we ought to try to fly home. And we went to the Aspen airport. They allowed us to board a flight. We flew to Chicago. Things were getting worse for me. I called my doctor's office. They said, you have a presumptive case of COVID. You need to treat yourself as though you have it. And you can't stay in Chicago. You need to get home. So I sat in the airplane with my shirt around my face because there were no masks. Nobody knew what to do with this thing. Did everything I could to wipe down the seats with all of our sanitizing wipes and just kind of cloister myself. Got home. Became seriously sick for 2 weeks, and took about, I'd say, a full month to feel like I was getting back to my normal self. That's when the reality hit for me that suddenly everything in my world was shifting. Everything that I had in my 2020 really expensive little daytimer calendar had changed. Appointments for local churches, consultations, a retreat I was to do in California, an art immersion program that I was to do up in the Bellefonte area, a 40th wedding anniversary Kim and I were going to take in the Willamette Valley of Oregon, a family wedding I was preside over in Western North Carolina. All of those things were just gone. And what that did for me was create a challenge. With all of that stuff stripped away and all the unknown about what was going to be happening or is happening in the world, how do I live in this time? What is a person to do? So what I found myself doing was coping with this reality by hooking my hopes, hooking a sense of purpose, hooking my sanity on the next thing that I could look forward to doing when COVID was gone. because we all thought it was going to be a 2-week or a 4-week kind of thing. And here we are. One by one, all of those things that I had hooked my hopes on were dissolving. And the reality hit me that none of the things that I had planned for would come to pass. And right now we're set to travel back to Colorado in February, but it's doubtful that we're going to be doing that with a spike in the coronavirus that's happening right now in the country. And I found that as I began to unhook all of these things, what came in its place was a sense of loss, a sense of grief, a sense of sadness, and quite frankly, anger. And I wasn't quite sure what to do with all of that. And then I found myself back to a scripture passage that has been one of my anchor passages all of my life. These words, as shared in the message: if you decide for God, living a life of God worship, it follows that you don't fuss about what's on the table at meal times or whether the clothes in your closet are in fashion. There's far more to your life than the food you put in your stomach, more to your outer appearance than the clothes you hang on your body. Look at the birds, free and unfettered, not tied down to a job description, careless in the care of God. And you count far more to him than birds. Has anyone by fussing in front of the mirror ever gotten taller by so much as an inch? All this time and money wasted on fashion. Do you think it makes that much difference? Instead of looking at the fashions, walk out into the fields and look at the wildflowers. They never primp or shop, but have you ever seen color and design quite like it? The 10 best dressed men and women in the country look shabby alongside them. If God gives such attention to the appearance of wildflowers, most of which are never ever seen, do you think he'll attend to you, take pride in you, do his best for you? What I'm trying to do here is to get you to relax, to not be so preoccupied with getting so you can respond to God's giving. People who don't know God and the way he works fuss over these things, but you know both God and how he works. Steep your life in God reality, God initiative, God provisions. Don't worry about missing out. You'll find all your everyday human concerns will be met. Give your entire attention to what God is doing now. And don't get worked up about what may or may not happen tomorrow. God will help you deal with whatever hard things come up when the time comes. Now, friends, I know these things. I believe these things. But still, I find myself struggling with these things. And in particular, that sense of this sense of God being concerned about where we are in the moment, what God is doing right now, not getting worked up about what may or may not happen tomorrow. And that's really the theme of this time that we spend together. What does it look like to live in the moment, to experience the moment? Jesus reminds us in the scriptures that we're not to fixate on the things of the past because they no longer exist. And we're not to become so focused on the future and what we want to happen in our lives that we miss what God is doing right now and right here. And it's in this moment where Jesus waits to meet us. If we'll stop long enough to find ourselves in his presence. I think Jesus was right. Jesus was right. It's about experiencing God in the moment. So the question for me is, how do I reorient my life and my orientation around that in the midst of what continues to be a challenging time, not only with COVID, but with the election and everything else that's been happening around us? What is it going to take for me to live more fully in the moment? Can I do that? And can you do that? Is the question that we hold in our hands. A friend of mine, Dr. Elaine Heath, talks about a contemplative stance, and I'll just share it with you now before we move forward. And it's about this orientation in our lives. And she says that to be contemplative in our living is to show up in the moment, to the here and now, fully present, to show up in the fullness of who we are, to pay attention. What's happening around me? Where is God in the midst of it? Show up, pay attention, participate with God in that moment, in that experience. And the fourth thing is to release the outcome. Show up, pay attention, participate with God, release the moment to embrace the next moment. So my question for you, and we're going to try the Zoom rooms, we'll see how well we do with this in pairs. The question before you go to your rooms is, where do you find yourself mostly oriented these days? Past, present, or future? Where do you find yourself spending most of your time? And the second part to that is, what do you need most from Jesus right now in that space? Where do you find yourself oriented mostly these days, past, present, or future? What do you need most from Jesus right now? We're going to take 5 minutes once you get in your Zoom room for you and your partner to have conversation around that. And if for some reason you get kicked back to where we are here, that's okay. But see what you can do with those questions. Okay? So Cindy, I'll let you expedite that if you haven't done so already. And I'll see you when the 5 minutes has expired. You know, one of the things that I find that kind of, and I added this since the last couple of times I did this, because coming out of my grief counseling work, I'm realizing that what this loss of schedule, loss of planning, unhooking all the things that we've looked forward to in the future, what that's created in me, and I'll just own it, is a tremendous sense of grief. I mean, every loss triggers grief in us and requires some processing. And then I thought, you know, in an unprecedented time, we are living in a time of universal grief. Because of the pandemic, the entire world is together in this. There have been times in our country, I think of 9/11, for example, when, you know, our culture, our country grieved powerfully, as did some of our allies around the world, but it didn't reach the whole world at the same level as this does. So some of the signs of this universal grief comes from the things that I have on the screen. These are the things that grieve us, or at least can lead to a sense of grief. And not only are these real things, but we look at, I gotta find my clicker here, symbolic losses that come along with grieving, a loss of identity. And I've talked to pastors who said, you know, I don't really know what my role is fully here, especially early on in this, where, you know, we weren't worshiping in the house, everything became online. How do I do pastoral care if I can't go to the hospitals and physically be with people? Who am I now that I'm no longer who I once was, is a phrase that I came up with. Who am I now that I'm no longer who I once was? That's part of loss and grief leads us to a new sense of self and identity. But a loss of a dream or a hope for the future, a loss of sense, a loss of symbols or cherished traditions. My gosh, I think of Thanksgiving. And I moved to be closer to my father, and I'm closer to my sisters. I'm closer to my extended family on Kim's side of the house. And we were looking forward to all of these first, you know, traditional kinds of gatherings and reunions. And it's not going to happen in the way we'd like it to happen. And I'm sorry, I mean, Zoom is just not a great way to have a Thanksgiving dinner. But maybe some of us will try that. We just had a 90th birthday party for my father, had to cancel all the plans that we had worked over a year to do this great celebration with relatives coming in from different places. But at the last moment, my wife, Kim, said, you know what? We need to just open up a Zoom room for an hour and a half and send the link to all your relatives. And we'll have your dad come over and we'll have dinner here and safe distance here. We have a pretty good sized parsonage that we live in. And just let him sit in front of the computer screen. I'm thinking, well, how's that going to work with a 90-year-old? And I thought people would just kind of pop in, chat with dad, and then leave. But all of them came, I think we counted like 6 different states, including my sons, my grandson, nieces, nephews, relatives. They all came to this thing and stayed the entire time. The screen was just filled with my father's loved ones, including his 92-year-old brother. And it was so awesome. I took pictures of watching my father watch the screen. And when people ask him, how was your birthday? He just said it was fantastic. And there were 3 of us in the room, but there were 40 of us present. Wow. Finding new ways to counter that. And then there's this anticipatory grief too that comes with it, which is grief that's not realized now, but we anticipate it. What's the future going to be like? What's the stock market doing to my pensions? And since the last time I wrote this, we have a vaccine that'll be on the market that's 90% effective, which is phenomenal in that world. Well, what happens if it doesn't work long enough? What if they find out it's only effective for 6 months or 3? We can do a number on ourselves, especially with anticipatory grief, because that's all future oriented and the future doesn't even exist yet. And if you're like me, I get wrapped around the axle thinking about what the future might bring. It keeps me from being in this moment where God wants to spend time with me. So I put on the screen here just to kind of give a sense of where you are in all of this, because this retreat is really about you. Feelings and behaviors of normal grief. There's abnormal grief, but this is normal grief. Look at this list. Put a check mark. You have, I think, the PowerPoint notes next to the feelings or behaviors that apply to you right now. And once you have that number, I'm going to ask you to just send it, I think, in the chat room. And Cindy's going to capture them as you send them in, and she's just going to read them out loud. Just the number, not who said it, but this person said 5 things. This person said 2. This person said 12. So as they come in, Cindy, you can rattle those off.
We've got 11, 8, 4. One has fatigue. 13, 5, 8, 7, 4, 9, 5, 7.
Thank you for sharing those numbers. I think some more are
We
coming
have a
in.
6 and a 5.
Now, again, I want you to hear that these are feelings and behaviors of normal grief. So you need to understand that you're normal and that you're grieving. And part of what you are experiencing in life, and maybe some of the emotions that we'll be talking about in a moment, are spinning out of grief. And there are times when I feel intensely angry and I self-blaming, and I feel guilty about that. Now I have a choice not to act on that anger, but I kind of get mad at myself for being angry, which is kind of stupid when you think about it. To be angry at being angry just compounds it. Until I realized that anger is a part of normal grief. And as a child of God and a human being, I'm grieving too. Did you have some other numbers, Cindy?
No, that's it.
So that's amazing. I didn't hear anybody say 0. I had one.
We have a 1 that just came.
Okay. Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that. I've never had anybody say 0. I've had anywhere from 1 to all of them. And I think what that says maybe to us is that spending more time doing healthy things in the moment gives us an opportunity to process this grief. And I would add too, that as a pastor, much of the negative behavior that you may be seeing or encountering in your own church community is coming out of a place of grief. That doesn't excuse people's behaviors, especially if their negative behavior is being directed at you as a pastor. It doesn't excuse it, but it may explain it. Cindy, does someone else send a note or a comment?
And then we have another one that has 5.
Okay, thank you. Grief is our reactions. Grief is our feelings to loss. Mourning is the process that we go through to adapt to the loss. So when we lose someone we love, or when we lose things that we love, we are mourning. And the mourning is the adaptation. It's the process of recalibrating ourselves. And what we learn is that none of that follows in a straight line, and it's up and down. You go to bed one night, wake up the next morning feeling elated, and the next day feeling like down in the dumps. And grief and mourning has the potential of creating this porpoising effect. And we wonder, why can I not like just be okay? The struggle with this is that we can mislabel grief in ourselves and in other people. We can mislabel it as other things and miss the opportunity to either help ourselves with some of the losses that we've experienced, recognizing that, or miss the opportunity to lead others as they're going through it themselves. So the 4 tasks of mourning, that process of adapting to the loss, is accept the reality. And that's getting to the point of unhooking ourselves from things that we've been looking forward to and saying, okay, that's not going to happen. I don't like it, but I've got to stop thinking about trying to get to Disney World in the next couple of weeks or by the end of this year. Process the pain of grief, talking it out, sharing it with someone else. When it gets to the point of being overwhelming, finding some professional help, a grief counselor or a spiritual director or a therapist that can help you get over whatever it is that's blocking normal living, whatever that is right now. And of course, getting to a new place of living in the world. Celebrating the things of the past that we've enjoyed, looking back on some of those memories and fondness, while charting a course for a future where there are a lot of things that are just simply unknown. One of the most profound persons that I've read, and that's the newest edition of this book. This was one of the earlier ones, and I've got tape on it because it's just falling apart. Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. Frankl was an Austrian neurologist, psychologist, Nazi concentration camp prisoner and survivor. But even as a young man, he knew that he wanted to do something that would be helping people, whether it was being a doctor, whether it was being a psychologist. But as a child, he had this interest in studying human behavior. When he ended up being arrested and interred by the Nazis in a prison camp, one of the things that helped Frankl to thrive and survive in that is that he had a golden opportunity to study human behavior in terms of himself and how he was adapting to this change and this new normal in his life, not knowing how things were going to end. He didn't have much thinking about the future, to be honest with you. He thought about, how do I find meaning in the present? And he studied it in others. The interesting thing was, he found, I think this is a little anecdotal stuff. I don't think this was written in any of your notes. But he found that the people who could not adapt to the present reality, who were so still fixated on the future, hooking their hopes on future things, were the ones that led lives of greatest despair, which I thought was interesting. And the highest suicide rate among the prisoners in the camp that he was part of were among that group. But he found that the people who seemed to be the most well-adjusted were the ones who were dealing with the reality of their encampment and saying, I hope to get out of here. And there are things that I look forward to if I get out of here, but I may not get out of here. So how do I live my life in this moment? How do I make the most of what I'm experiencing right now? Now, his mother and his brother and his wife, Victor's mother, brother, and wife, were all also imprisoned in Nazi concentration camps, and they all died at the hands of the Nazis. He was the lone survivor of his family coming out of that. But here are some of the nuggets that I think they've helped to ground me spiritually, help me keep me in the moment, and to understand that how I live my life now and how I react to and relate to and work through the fabric of my life now has intense meaning on the kind of person that I'm going to be and my relationship with other people and with God. So these are quotes from his book. Those who have a why to live can bear with almost any how. And that why was something that was anchored in a moment. Why do I exist in this moment? And how do I need to live out of that why? Everything can be taken from a person but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any set of circumstances, to choose one's way. What matters is not the meaning of life in general, but rather a specific meaning of a person's life at any given moment. One of the interesting things in Buddhist philosophy is this sense of being in the moment. Often talking about when you're eating an orange, you eat the orange. You savor each segment of the orange as you're eating it. You're not thinking about what it's going to be like when you eat your soup next, or your next phone call or Zoom call or work event. But you stay in the moment, and when you're eating this, you're eating it and you're fully appreciating it, and you're appreciating the fact that life that has created this orange that's giving such delicious taste in this moment. And Thich Nhat Hanh, who has written a lot of stuff related to Buddhism and Christianity. In fact, he's a Buddhist who receives communion, who embraces the deity of Christ as the incarnation of Christ. It's a very interesting relationship and phenomenon. But he talks about how important it is to live in the moment, to savor the moment, to stay in the moment of what we're doing and not be thinking about the next things that are coming or what we just walked away from. And so it goes back to this whole thing that Frankl had learned about and experienced in his own life. What matters is not the meaning of life in general, but rather a specific meaning of a person's life at a given moment. What I'm experiencing now as an incredibly powerful gift of God. So one of the questions that you wrestle with, and I think in the spiritual retreat would be helpful to carry with you, is to answer the question, what is my why? What is my why? Why do I exist? This isn't the future I planned for myself. It may not be the appointment that I desired. It may not be the circumstances in terms of my health. But why do I exist in this moment? And where do I find meaning in these days? I served as a hospice chaplain, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment, in two inpatient units where we received the most dire of people who were facing life-limiting illnesses. And when they came to us, they were days or hours away from dying. And one of the things that I worked with the patients in those units who were still conscious and could have conversation, one of the things that I learned from them is all of them were asking why statements, not why did this happen to me? Because they were coming to a place of acceptance, but why am I still here in this moment? And I got to work with them to talk about what is your purpose today? And you may be, I would say to them, you may be a few hours away from death, but what purpose do those few hours of your life still have in this moment? And they talked about, most of them were relational. how they treated the staff, looking out the windows to celebrate creation, and the bird feeders that we had, and the birds and the deer that would come to the windows. Or for some of them, it was they needed to have a conversation, releasing someone from indebtedness to them, a grief that they carried, a trespass, a sin against them, finding some kind of a reconnection. And for some of them, it was a reuniting in their relationship with God. But all of those things were happening at a given moment, because the past was disappearing for these patients and the future was very limited. So they were forced to deal with what was happening in the here and now. When I read these things from Frankl, I'm reminded again of what Jesus said. Give your entire attention to what God is doing right now. Don't get worked up about what may or may not happen tomorrow. God will help you deal with whatever hard things come up when the time comes, when that moment comes. Wow. I think it's incredibly profound and powerful. And yet I find myself struggling to do this. So if you will allow me to lead you in a meditational exercise, some of you will be perhaps more comfortable with this than others. That's okay. You find your place in it. This is not about how everybody else is doing with it, but how maybe you will do in it. This is going to take several minutes, and I invite you to just be in a comfortable place. If you feel at any time you want to mute your screen, you can mute that. You can mute your screen so it's just your name there, so that you are secluded in your own space. That's okay to do as well. And I'm just going to lead us in this exercise, which is a way of grounding us in the present moment. And I invite you to either close your eyes or fix your gaze on the floor, the wall, or whatever. But just try and close yourself out from the surroundings around you right now. And find a comfortable place in your chair. Just let your body settle in. And let your shoulders drop. Just let the weight that you're carrying in your shoulders, just let that go. Push your feet flat into the floor. Feel the carpet, the tile, the wood. Get a sense of the ground beneath you. Take a moment to notice how you're sitting, your posture. Correct it if you need to, readjust. And take notice of your breath. Just get in tune with your breathing for a little bit. And even with your eyes closed or fixed, notice what you can see, even in your mind's eye. Notice what you hear. Notice what you smell. Notice what you can taste. Notice what you feel against your skin. Notice what you are feeling inside. There's a part of you inside that's noticing all of these things, that notices the seeing and the hearing and the touching and the tasting and the smelling and the feeling and the thinking. You can call that part of yourself anything you want. I tend to think of it as my observing self. It's the part of me that is observing things. right now observing me. This is a part of you that can step back or step aside and watch all of these things going on inside you, almost as if it's watching actors on a play. Your observing self can zoom in and focus on one thing at a time, like your breathing, or when I ask you to reflect on your hearing, it can zoom in on that, or it can zoom back and take in all of these things at once. So we're going to invite your observing self to do a little work right now in this exercise. Take a moment to reflect on why you came here and why you said yes to this retreat. There's something that matters to you, something important in the deepest part of yourself that maybe motivated you to be here. Maybe it's to learn something new. Maybe it's to let something go. Maybe it's to develop a new coping skill or build a better relationship with God. If you can, let that reason for your being here just kind of show up in front of you now. If you can picture it like words on a computer screen or skywriting in the air, what is it? What is it that motivated you to be here? See if you can see that. So for the next few moments, I'd like you to focus on emptying out your lungs. Push the air out until there's no more air left. And then allow them to gently fill again by themselves. Don't force your inhalation, but just let your lungs fill naturally. Push it all out. Let it fill again by itself. Ruah, breath. God breathed into creation. God breathes into you. Focus on your breath. Notice it flowing in and out naturally. For the next couple of minutes as we continue, just try to keep your attention on your breath. Be in the moment with your own breathing. Observe it flowing in and out. Inviting God to fill you with Ruah, with His Spirit. You'll notice that things will intrude on your observing your breath. Something will pop up that will draw your attention away. That's okay. You can't help it, and there's no sense trying. A car just passed my house and I heard it, and I stopped thinking about my breath. So I let the car pass and I come back to my breath. I stay centered on my breathing. We find when we do this that our mind is chattering away like a radio playing in the background. It keeps broadcasting things while I'm trying to be focused on my breath. That's okay. Don't try to turn the radio off. It's not possible to do that. Just let it play in the background. Keep your attention on your breathing. Maybe your mind will hook you with a good story, a painful remembrance, a reminder of something important that you have to do, and you lose track of your breathing. That's normal. When it happens, just come back to your breath. Simply acknowledge the things that appear and let them go. And come back to your breathing. As the exercise continues, the feelings and sensations in your body may change. There may be some pleasant feelings showing up, such as, gosh, I feel relaxed. I'm feeling calm. This is peaceful. There may be unpleasant feelings, such as I'm bored, or I don't know that I'm doing this right, or anxiety or frustration about something. Just let these feelings be what they are in that moment. Don't try to control them. Don't push them away. Let them be as they are. Just let them be and keep focused on your breathing. As feelings come to you, good or troubling feelings, let them be as they are, without a struggle. If you're noticing a difficult feeling, it might be helpful to silently say to yourself, oh, here's a feeling of frustration. Or here's a feeling of anxiousness. Or here's a feeling of peace. Here's a feeling of calm. Every time a thought or feeling comes up, acknowledge it. Here's a feeling of, and then go back and focus on your breathing. So with your eyes closed or still fixed on a place, kind of feel yourself back in your chair again. Notice again your arms and legs, and move your head and your neck and your shoulders around. And when you're ready, open your eyes again and notice what you see. And notice what you hear. Notice what you smell. Notice what you're feeling. There's that observing part of you that is noticing all of these things. So I'd like to just, as I draw that exercise to a close, just to point out a couple of things of what we were doing there. One is, number one, it is literally impossible to stay in the moment, because I read somewhere that the moment, the here and now, is only like 80 thousandths of a second. From the past to the future, the present is very, very short. So when people say, I've got to learn how to live in the present, well, that's a very short period. But the point is to allow yourself to get free of the past and the future enough to just simply be. And that's where the breathing helps, to focus on our breathing. It's a centering thing as much as anything. And when the past does arrive, and it will, or the future comes to us, and it will, of not trying to push those things away, but just accepting them and then just letting them go, and then staying as much as we can in the present moment with our breathing. It's a technique that a lot of different religions practice, Christianity being one of them. And I think out of Jesus' teaching, as he talks about experiencing God and being with God, Jesus went away a lot. And I wonder, what was he doing when he was away? And I'm wondering if maybe he was doing a lot of this, because it's a very Eastern orientation. For Westerners like us, we're doers. It's hard for us to do these kinds of things and feel as though it's valuable. But it is something that we can learn and that we can practice. And so you've developed a skill just in the 5 minutes that we did that, 5 minutes or so. You learned how to focus on your breathing, and you learned how to handle in things that intrude upon the time that you simply want to be present to the moment. And we're going to practice some more of those things again, because I think where God wants to meet us is in those spaces. I learned a long time ago that our minds are really time machines. We are oriented either reflecting on the past and what we did and how well we did it, what we could have done differently, what I forgot to do, conversation I had, whether I wanted that to be a different kind of conversation, or we orient ourselves, the mind takes us into the future of what we're going to experience next and what I want to do here and what I need to kind of design and develop out there somewhere as I get there. I mean, do you find that true? It's like we're either in one of those places or the other. And that's okay. But the past no longer exists, and neither does the future. Those things are just constructs that don't exist. The past is past, it's gone. We can't do anything to go back there to fix any of that stuff. And there isn't anything we can do to change what we're going to experience in the future, except our readiness and our centeredness to be in whatever moment emerges for me. Am I preparing myself to be fully present with you all right now, to be fully present for the 3 more Zoom calls that I have this day? I'm not even worried about those Zoom calls because those moments will arrive. I feel like I prepared well enough so I can stay in the moment. Cindy, did we have some comments or anything that came in? I saw a number pop up on my screen.
Oh, nope, we're good.
Okay. Anything anybody wants to just share via chat, or you can unmute yourself if you want to do that and just talk about what that experience was like for you. We're not going to draw that out, but just to give you an opportunity to say what you experienced.
I really just realized the calmness that I felt inside of me. There's just something right in the center of me now that is calmed. Not that I'm looking forward to anything, not that I'm thinking about what may have happened or what. It's just a calm, almost like you're ready for almost anything.
Awesome. You're ready for the next moment. Thank you for sharing that. You know, physiologically, when our bodies were created, when God created us with a wonderful system designed to keep us out of harm. And we would call that the fight or flight reflex. And it's a good thing because it keeps us from walking out into traffic. It keeps us from driving through stop signs. It keeps us from eating poisonous foods. It keeps us out of fights, out of all kinds of things. That reflex is a biochemical thing that happens when I'm feeling threatened or fearful. My brain tells me to create and dump two things into my adrenal system, into my system that affects all of the systems, cardiovascular especially. It's called adrenaline and cortisol. Those two things are what makes it possible for me to run fast and to get out of harm's way. My blood pressure elevates when those things are pumping into my system. My heart rate increases. Hyper awareness of what's happening around me. Okay. Those are great things. But what happens in modern life is that we don't have a wild bear threatening our lives, therefore dumping the stuff into my system. We have a conversation that we're not looking forward to. We have a parishioner that has attacked us either verbally or emotionally. We have the news stations that are constantly feeding into that, of creating this sense of fear and anxiety in us. We have all kinds of things that all the time, our bodies are being flooded with these two chemicals. And doctors are seeing it as one of the results of COVID. One of the ways we deal with that, one of the things that can shut that down is what you just experienced a few moments ago, which is why you're experiencing a sense of peace. Your blood pressure has lowered. Your heart rate has lowered with breathing and meditation and reflection. Your brain has told your body, we don't need adrenaline here, thank you very much, because we're not being threatened by anything. And so you enter into this state of calm. Now, you all know, as I know, that the next moment may bring all that stuff back again. So how do we battle it? How do we stay centered? Doing what we just did. It is a form of prayer to open ourselves fully to the present moment with our breathing. And we'll learn, and I've got some other exercises where we link them intentionally with prayer, which even strengthens the experience. So I appreciated your willingness to share that. I don't see your name, but thank you. Any other thoughts before anything else come up, Cindy?
We're good to go.
Okay.
And that was Deb Harvey, by the way.
Okay. I was going to say Deb, but I didn't want to call you by the wrong name. Thanks, Deb. So there's 3 movements in our spiritual lives that can help us stay fully present. The first one is being present with, but not hooked by, my thoughts and feelings. We're going to spend a little bit of time on that. My thoughts and my feelings are not the problem, by the way. And having thoughts and feelings don't get in the way of meaningful living. But not allowing myself to get hooked to those things. If I get hooked by my thoughts and feelings, that's where it becomes a problem. We're going to talk about it. The second is committing and recommitting to a valued direction for my life. And so we're going to talk about values. And the third is taking meaningful action in this present moment. And that's where these exercises kind of help to orient us in that way. I need to do something with my screen here. Okay. So being present with, but not hooked by, my thoughts and feelings. So early in my COVID days, as I relate to pastors across the annual conference, I checked on as many pastors that I had been working with in various projects and others that just came to my mind in prayer. And these were some of the comments that I collected early on in this. And maybe you can see yourself in this as well, these thoughts and feelings. I've never worked harder or felt more inadequate. I have felt that way in my workaday world. This has completely changed how I saw myself working as the director of equipping vital congregations. I've had to retool and rethink about everything related to this work. I suspect you have too. These are pastors. At times I feel like a fraud. I put on a brave face for my family and church folks, but I suffer in silence. Sometimes I think God is extremely disappointed in me. Oh, this is painful. What do I do with all the negative thoughts and stress-producing feelings and thoughts that bombard me? And that's where I think I can provide some help in that. Maybe you see yourself in this picture as well. So here's the thing. We can't stop our thoughts and our feelings. It's part of the way God made us. And it's a waste of time to try and deny that they exist. So what is a better way? Hopefully you got something that looked like this in your resources that were sent to you. If not, I will tell you that this funny looking thing you'll find on, if you Google, you'll find 100 different iterations of this thing. It's called a feeling wheel. This is something that I learned about in CPE, Clinical Pastor Education for Chaplain Training. This has been one of the most helpful things that I've experienced that I share with other people, because it's a tool to help us acknowledge our feelings and to acknowledge them with maybe a little bit more accuracy. So the feeling wheel, as you look in the center, there are 7 primary feelings: happy, surprised, bad, fearful, angry, disgusted, and sad. And then there are a whole bunch when you go to the second and third tiers. I think there's well over 200 different feeling expressions in this wheel. So it's one thing for me to say, I feel bad, but what is it I really am expressing in that? What's the feeling behind the feeling of feeling bad? What I want to do is to invite you to look in the second tier of this wheel where the arrow is pointing. Don't go to the center. I'm going to ask you to identify a feeling that maybe when you woke up this morning, you had breakfast, to think about a feeling that you had, or maybe one now. Look in that center ring and try and find a word that expresses your feeling right now in this moment, or when you got up this morning. And it'll take some time to do this, so I'll give you a moment. Look around that wheel. Maybe when you find that word, just write it down on your notes. When you land on it, then I want you to go out to the outer ring, because you'll see it goes, it'll express it in 2 words now. I personally deal with anxiety. I have all of my life. And I'm learning how to deal with it. I was on medication for a while, and sometimes you need medication to deal with some of these things. But some of these practices that I'm sharing with you have helped me to deal with them without needing the medication. Always in communication with my doctor, I will add. I'm not an anti-medication person, and I'm certainly not an anti-therapy person, because I've had both and been in both. But I'm an anxious person. That lines up under fearful. When I find anxious, I can say, okay, the primary feeling is fear. The secondary feeling is anxiety. When I go out to the third ring, it says overwhelmed and worried. So I can say, why am I feeling anxious? And I can go, okay, I'm probably either feeling overwhelmed at something or worried about something. And man, it usually is one of those 2 things. Then I can go, what am I feeling worried about? What am I feeling overwhelmed about? And then I can unpack that a little bit more. And then I can begin to deal with that feeling. Okay, is there an action that I can take? Is there something that I can do to alleviate the pain of that feeling? Or is there something I need to do to just listen to myself to say, okay, it's okay to feel overwhelmed. Everybody feels overwhelmed sometimes. It's okay to feel worried. Is there something I need to address? So you find your word there and the 2 words that come out to describe it, okay? So what I'm going to ask you to do, we're going to go into our Zoom rooms again, and you're going to be paired up with somebody. And you can just focus on one of these. What one feeling seems most powerful to you right now in your experience? Jot down that word, jot down the 2 words next to it, because I don't know that you'll be able to, well, if you have the wheel in front of you, you'll be able to see it in your conversation. And the question, what do you typically do when a feeling like this overwhelms you? So let's go into our Zoom room. And I would say we're going to, We'll spend 5 minutes. We'll spend 5 minutes in that with a partner in pairs.
Okay.
And when you're done with your 5 minutes, take a bathroom break if you need one before you come back to us. Okay.
We'll see you all in 5 minutes.
Thank you, Cindy. Hey, we're back. Thanks for coming back. Hopefully that was a good conversation. People have often commented on this wheel as being kind of a helpful resource. And there are times, even now, I carry it in my head when I'm doing a walk or whatever, and I'm just feeling a little out of kilter, and I'm trying to figure out what's going on. What is this? It helps me to go, okay, I'm feeling this, and maybe this is why I'm feeling that way, and then let it go. You could get so attached to your feeling that you're overwhelmed by it. And I do meet people in counseling and all that. That's why they come to counseling. They can't get through that. They can't find the strategy to feel it and release. And so one of the things that, let's see, get my PowerPoint working here. Okay, we did that. One of the things that I share with folks, and this is very much about our spiritual lives, because our spiritual lives are our emotional lives, our physical lives, the soul work, all that comes as a package. But to try and name the feeling or thought as it is. This is what it is. And observe it as if, I did this with my young son who's given anxiety, is to teach him how to observe this feeling as if he's standing apart from it, as if he's objectifying himself. I'm having a feeling of anxiety. And to be able to kind of see it, name it, let it be there a while, and then let it pass. And when it comes back again, to address it again. And he went through a very tough time right now. Paternity stuff with his daughter, just moved. I mean, he's dealing with an awful lot of stuff. It's like, Jake, and he's wired like I am, very emotional, kind of a feeling oriented person. Jake, feelings are natural and they're helpful. Let yourself feel that, but don't wallow in it. Because he would allow the anger and that to fester to the point where it colored every decision he made. And it colored the next conversation he would have with us or anybody. And we'd have to say to him, it's really helpful to experience these feelings, name it as they are, acknowledge that, but don't allow that to be the driver behind your next move, right? Your next action. And when it comes up again, acknowledge it, know where it's coming from, feel it and let it go. For some reason, my computer is goofy. So an exercise that I shared with him, that I'll share with you, and one that I practice in my own life, I call it leaves on a stream. How creative is that? Because that's what you're looking at, leaves on the stream. So, I'm clever if I'm not anything else. So I'm just going to, and again, invite you into a quiet space like we did before. This is not going to be nearly as long. And just kind of center yourself. And if you're not muted, go ahead and mute your mic. And if you want to mute your video so that just your name appears, that's okay too. But again, this always starts with a comfortable position. It's hard to be centered when you're sitting with your legs folded the wrong way. But find that comfortable position. And again, close your eyes or focus on a spot. And again, as you're sitting there, just, again, be aware of your breathing. Don't make your breathing happen, but just simply be aware of it. And now I'm going to invite you to imagine yourself sitting by the side of a stream, sitting on the bank of a flowing stream, like we would have in beautiful Pennsylvania. And if you can, try to picture that stream. Just picture what the water looks like as it's running past you. Is it flowing to your left or is it flowing to your right? What sound is the stream making? Can you hear the water bubbling as it passes over rocks? Or is it just a quiet stream? When you're looking at the stream, is the water clear? Can you see the rocks underneath the water? and what's around the stream. And as you're at the side of whatever stream you're sitting near, there are leaves right now, like outside, that are dropping from the trees and landing on the water. And watch that happen. And watch which way they flow as they're carried by the stream. What color are they? Are they spinning on the water or just staying in the same position as they float by? What are they doing? And as you're watching this, leaves falling on the water and then being carried away. Just watch that. And then that feeling that you talked about with the other person in your room, place that feeling on a leaf. See the words of that feeling on the leaf. Somehow put them on the leaf. And then allow it to go. Watch it float downstream. Whatever thought or feeling you have right now, there's another leaf on your stream, place it on that leaf. And watch it float by. If your mind is saying, this is stupid, I don't want to do this, put that on the leaf. Allow the stream to flow at its own rate. You're not trying to make it go, just you're watching it go by. And if a leaf gets stuck or caught in an eddy and it's spinning around, let it hang around for a while. It'll move on its own time. Just watch it there. From time to time, when you're doing this little exercise, your thoughts or a feeling will hook you and try and hold you, and you'll lose track of the exercise. It's okay, it happens. Just all you have to do as soon as you realize that is acknowledge it and then move your focus back to the stream. Just come back to that water, to the sounds, the sight, maybe even a smell, coolness of the air. Just place your thoughts and feelings on the stream. Acknowledge that they exist. Place them on a leaf and let them go past. And when you're ready, you can come back to the room. Open your eyes and sit up. And so, anybody just want to share briefly what that experience was like for you? You can unmute yourself and just share what you think.
So I'll be
Gary,
honest, I was a little distracted in it, in that it made me think about going fly fishing and catching some trout this weekend. And so I had to fight that the whole time.
I'm laughing because I have the same thing every time I think about it. I'm at the Yellow Breeches. I live close to the Yellow Breeches. It's exactly where my mind goes.
Gary,
Gary, I
found
was a
that-
little troubled
sorry.
because my feeling on the wheel was under happy, right?
Great.
And it had to do with feeling trusting and feeling intimate and feeling these kind of things. And the exercise is almost asking me to let go of that. And so to put that on a leaf and let it go. And so I needed to work against just being pissed off at the exercise, right? So, and because I don't want to let go of those feelings, right?
Right,
Because
right.
because I feel
Yeah.
good. So that's just where I was.
Yeah. And, I'm glad you mentioned that. My partner in conversation also was happy and went by and looked at the other words that describe it, really a sense of contentment. And you don't want to let go of that. But nor do you want to stay so focused on that you're missing the next thing that comes, right? So putting it on a leaf and letting it pass by can be an offering, right? You're offering that back to God. By letting the leaf flow. I used to do exercises like this with parishioners by tying feelings on the string of a balloon. And I could tell you a longer story, but I won't because of time. But tying whatever feeling they had, happy, sad, distressed, painful, mournful, whatever, on the end of a white ribbon tied to a bright red balloon. And when they visualize themselves tying that, I would invite them in their mind's eye, this is all very meditational, to release it and to just simply raise their hand or let me know when the balloon ascended to the point they could no longer see it. And sometimes it would be immediate, and sometimes it would be minutes, and they'd put their hand up. And then they would talk about what it was like to release those things, either as a praise to God or as a prayer to God. And the sense that they were no longer having to carry, if it was a burden, they no longer felt like it was something that they had to carry on their own. And it's a very powerful thing. And it really is. For me, my prayers anymore are very, I'm a wordy person, obviously. You're hearing me talk all this time. But in my prayer, I'm not verbal. It's almost all visual anymore because I've just learned the power of the visuals. And you can be both. You can be whatever you want. I'm not trying to steer you. But make it work for you, right? These exercises, stylize it so that it works for you is, I think, the most important thing. One of the things that I'm learning in my own spiritual journey is that unpleasant thoughts and feelings may be signals that life is a bit out of balance. And so I need to pay attention to them because they tell me something about my interior life, right? And I'm learning that my feelings and thoughts are not problems to be solved, and I'm a problem solver. So I get to work on trying to overanalyze it to the point where I'm hooked. And when I become hooked on those things is when it's problematic because I'm not able to release it. But they're not to be fixed, wrestled to the ground, or pushed away. That what's required is acceptance. And one of the strains of counseling that I've studied and certified in is called acceptance and commitment therapy. And I love it because the acceptance part is about accepting these things as part of the fabric of my life. And if I accept them and don't deny them, then they find a place in me or through me. And a little cartoon that I did when I was finishing the training process for acceptance and commitment therapy, I did this little doodle. Are you willing to create a meaningful and valued life and carry your thoughts and feelings with you as you go on your way? Not leaving them behind, but they travel with me. And we can spend a lot of time just analyzing the orientation of the person, the position of this monster. Sometimes my feelings are monstrous. I don't necessarily want to carry those kinds of feelings with me or even acknowledge that they exist, but they are a part of me. But they don't impede my forward movement. They don't impede the direction that I intend to go in my relationship with Christ and my ministry. So there are some other things that I find, and I love this one. Sometimes the fear won't go away, so you'll have to do it afraid. If we wait for the fear to subside, we may never do anything. No, we're going to move forward. Remember, stress doesn't come from what's going on in your life. It comes from what your thought, it comes from your thoughts of what's going on. Think about how true that is. Right? It's what we allow our thoughts and feelings to manufacture when we become hooked. We allow those things to create the reality for us when they may not be reality at all. So part of this is to be whole spiritually, I think, is to make sure that there's an alignment between our thoughts and feelings and how we live, the choices that we make in terms of the next thing we do. And the power behind all of that brings alignment and focus is our values. Our values. Those of us on conference staff, we work with churches and we help churches to talk about their values because values give direction. A great exercise is this one in the middle. On your 100th birthday, your family and friends gather to celebrate and reflect upon your life. What would you hope they would say about you? Maybe you just, as we're just pausing for a moment, you jot down a few things that you would hope that on that birthday you would hear people saying about you. I love that question. I've heard it too. At your funeral, what do you want? What would you want people to say about you? I don't use that one because I want to hear what they have to say. I don't want to be dead. Values are just so important. Values are our heart's deepest desires for the way we want to interact with and relate to God, the world, others, and ourselves. And values are all about behavior. I want people to remember me for my values, not necessarily for my accomplishments, although my accomplishments may come out of my values. But the tasks I did and the things that I performed and the accomplishments in my life, while meaningful in this life, to me, the things that are most enduring, even in eternity, are the values. Values always influence action. If we want to know what we truly value in life, we need only to examine our behavior. And that is true of every person you see on television. It's true of every conversation you're having with others. It's true in terms of your own behavior. If you want to know what you really value, then look at how you behave. This is just a poster that expresses the values that a person would proclaim. In the end, only three things matter: how much you loved, how gently you lived, how gracefully you let go of things not meant for you. So I'm going to lead to another exercise, and it's kind of a values clarification. Hopefully you got this sheet because the words are really tiny on the screen. But when I invite somebody to share their values, without giving them something like this, it's just hard to come up with a list. So there's 30 plus values listed here. And what I want to invite you to do with that values worksheet, I'll come back to that in a moment. The second bullet here is on your notes. If you get a piece of paper or the PowerPoint that you're following, just write down these 4 spheres of your life: work, relationships, personal growth / well-being, and leisure and Sabbath. Those 4 areas: work, relationships, personal growth, well-being. Personal growth and well-being is one, and then your leisure or your Sabbath. So as you list those things, look at the value sheet and find a value that you would write behind each of those areas. For work, what is a value that you have in your workaday world? For me, I had one here and the list is so long I lost it. I'm gonna go with 21, fun and humor. Hopefully Cindy would substantiate this. I'm kind of a lighthearted guy most of the time. I value my work being fun, that it's something that I enjoy doing. Probably the day when that no longer exists, I won't be doing the job. That's a value. I could do the same thing with the other three spheres. But I want to just take a moment. Find at least one value in each of those four areas. I'm going to give you time to work on that. And I'll be right back. One of the things that I would encourage you to do post-retreat is to look at those four areas and look at those values and continue looking at that value sheet. And as many as you can, try and line up values around in those four areas. And under relationships is where I would put God. So there are things that I value that I want to guide my behavior in my relationship with God. And then think about, and this is kind of a reflection thing, what kinds of things are you doing, behaviors and practices that allow that value to exist and to kind of guide your living and your lifestyle. If you are living in such a way where you are not fulfilling your values, that's a problem. But when you live out of your values, you always find the kind of alignment that will give consonance and dissonance. Consonance means to sound with. Dissonance means to sound against. We experience dissonance when we are living in a way that is against what we deeply value. We find consonance sounding with it when we're living according to our values. I'm going to share a personal story just to illustrate this, and then we're going to move on. Gary wanted to know how I was going to fill 2 hours. Now you know. I'm going to shorten this story, but it's one from when I was working at hospice. There was a patient who was Hispanic Latino. He understood English, but he didn't speak it. I didn't understand or speak Spanish, very little. And he was a patient who was in his 30s and had a massive tumor that was nearly the size of his own head on his neck. And there was nothing that could be done for him. And it would bleed, and everyone knew that it was going to take his life. And he was a patient that, because I didn't understand the language, because of his situation, I didn't know how to help and care for him. The language was an obstacle. My own insecurities and feeling insufficient for the moment got in my way. I found myself hiding from him. I had other patients that I could easily visit, so I found reasons why I didn't necessarily have to go into his room quite so often. It was always a very uncomfortable place to be. As a chaplain, I couldn't find my place in the room, not my physical place, but my existence, my why for being in the room, to live that out. And so I was visiting with another patient when a nurse came in and said, I think you need to go down. It would probably be a good idea for you to stop in because things are not going well. And I said, okay. And everything about me said I didn't want to do that. All my feelings and thoughts just were leading me completely away from his room. And I went in the restroom and I literally grabbed both sides of the sink. And I had to say aloud what I valued about being a chaplain, what led me into chaplaincy, what led me into ministry. And I had to list my values. And then I said to myself, these are the things you value, which is why you exist, which is why you are here. You need to align your behavior, your next behavior, to your values. You need to go into his room and you need to trust God. And I did that. I felt my feelings. I heard my thoughts. I let them pass. I decided to focus on my values as a disciple of Jesus, and I went into his room. Lo and behold, no family members were there. His sister was his interpreter, but she wasn't present. And I thought, oh, this is going to be really hard. And when I went in, he was kind of sleeping, and I thought, well, maybe he won't even know I'm here. And he opened his eyes and he greeted me, and I greeted him back. And I basically just said, I don't know what to do next. I don't know how to help. And I just invited him to guide me. And he pointed to a Bible, a Spanish Bible that I had brought to him, and said, read. And I opened up the Psalms that I knew that I was used to using and reading in English. And I opened them and I read it as much as I could in Spanish. And I was known as a singing chaplain. I carried a little hymnal around, and he heard me singing. And he just pointed to me and he said, sing, por favor. And I opened up my little English hymnal and I started singing. And then when I was finished, he said, pray, and he held out his hands. So he directed me. It was beautiful. And I held his hands and I prayed, and I was in tears and he was in tears, and we were alone in that moment with God in the room. And when I was finished, he thanked me, and he said, you have beautiful voice. And I looked at him and I said, you have no taste. And he started laughing and I started laughing, which was an even more beautiful moment. And in time, he was tired and needed to go back to sleep, and I left the room. And I left with such a feeling of relief, and such a feeling of joy that I had followed not my feelings and thoughts, but my values, and allowed God to use those to guide me into the room and have that amazing experience. He died the next day, and I wasn't there. He died in the middle of the night, and his family were still there collecting belongings the next day. And they thanked me profusely for what I had meant to him and to them in that final conversation. All of that to say is values matter, and how we live out our lives matter, to bring alignment as one spiritual person into the room of another spiritual person. The other things that I want to share with you are in your notes. And just to touch on them briefly in our remaining minutes, staying grounded in the moment. I love the scripture, Psalm 46:10, be still and know that I am God. That word still means cease striving, be in awe, calm down, relax, put your hands down. For me, there's a sense of surrender. Gary, surrender. Know and trust that I am God. In the story with Elijah running away, hiding for fear of his own life, God comes and has this encounter with him. The Lord passed by, verse 11, a strong wind tore through the mountains and broke the rocks in pieces before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, the earth shook, but the Lord was not in the shaking of the earth. After the earth shook, a fire came, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a sound of gentle blowing. Oh, I love that. When Elijah heard it, he put his coat over his face and went out and stood at the opening of the hole. Somehow I think he knew that was God. Then a voice came to him and said, what are you doing here, Elijah? Where was God to be found? In the places least expected. God came in a gentle whisper. And I like that question. What are you doing here? And I carry this with me throughout the day. It's like when I'm in quiet, I almost hear God saying, Gary, what are you doing here? And then I'm able to state my intention. I just want to be with you. I want to put my arms down. I want to stop striving. I want to be still. I want to surrender and know that you are God in this moment. So my question is, my friends, when are you still enough to hear a whisper? And in those moments, how would you answer God's question? What are you doing here? What are you doing here? To be in the moment requires two things. It's pretty simple, really. Sit and breathe. And we've been experiencing that today together, to sit and breathe. And I think sitting is not just a pause from activity or a break between doing things. It is an intentional openness and posture of openness to God. And breathing, allowing the Ruah of God, the Spirit of God, to fill and indwell within us, so that when we are done being in the moment and moving into the next moment, we do that with intentionality and a sense of having been touched by the holy. I included this as something to carry with you. My spiritual director, when I was in North Carolina, actually, this was my spiritual director in Colorado, gave me this. It's very powerful. A daily examination of grace around gratitude and struggle and invitation. To intentionally, at the end of the day, end our day with reflection of sensing where God has been with us, where we have been lacking, where we need strength and grace, and how we intend to be in the next moment that God may give us. So I've enjoyed being with you all in this format, in this very brief time. I hope that something that you experience has been helpful and formational, not just informational. And that you experience the peace and grace and presence of God in the moments of your lives. As our bishop would say, for such a time as this.